Thank you all for watching and supporting my videos. Your encouragement keeps me inspired to create even more content. My next big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I can't do it without your help. If you enjoy what I create, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. Now let's dive into the stories. Night. The monitor's light is off, and the room is lit only by the faint reflection from the window light. Brad, the streamer, sits at his computer, his face illuminated only by the screen. He has just finished streaming the terrifying game The Joy of Creation. The game was brutal and the atmosphere was absolutely tense. Over the course of several hours, Brad had completed a difficult level where the protagonist enters a strange house resembling an old hospital, where strange and eerie occurrences begin. During the stream, Brad became increasingly tense. Monitors showing a monster emerging from the darkness, strange sounds in the game rooms, his reactions were genuine. His viewers loved it, every bit of fear, every startled glance became part of the show. And after finishing the level, when Brad leaned back in his chair, not believing he had endured it all, he felt a strange sense of relief. He placed his hands on the keyboard, preparing to end the stream when he heard the sound. It's 11 p.m., and viewers are leaving positive comments. Brad leans back in his chair, relaxing. Everything seemed over, but the strange sound, a crack, almost like a faint breath, interrupts the silence. At first, he thinks it's some noise from the equipment connected to his computer, but the crackling doesn't stop. The appearance of his house seems ordinary. Household items, comfortable furniture, a workspace. But the sound keeps growing as if someone in the room is not leaving him alone. He listens more attentively, his heart starting to race. What was that? Thoughts echo in his head, but he tries to calm himself. Nothing scary happens in the middle of the night, right? He laughs to himself, trying to find a logical explanation, and decides to go downstairs to check. Brad grabs his phone and walks to the door. He descends the stairs, feeling his heartbeat faster. The hallway is dark, the light only reflecting from his computer screen fading with each step. He stops at the bottom of the stairs. The crackling is clearer now, no longer just isolated sounds, but as if someone is quietly moving around the rooms. Brad places his hand on the railing, feeling doubt rise within. What is this? And why did this sound appear only after I finished the game? He turns and heads toward the door to the first floor. His fingers involuntarily clench as he approaches the lower level. What if this is what happened in the game? What if this isn't just sounds? But he doesn't believe in such things, so he decides to check to calm himself. The rooms on the first floor look just the same as always. The dining table, the kitchen, the windows. But something changes, something feels off. At first he doesn't notice anything strange, but then the crackling again. He stops in the kitchen doorway, his gaze scanning the room, trying to find the source of the noise. Then something catches his attention, the alarm on the cupboard. It's blinking as if signaling something. It's just the electricity, nothing more. Brad tries to calm himself, but fear still grips him. He walks toward the cupboard, hearing the crackling grow louder. As he gets closer, the door suddenly opens again, and a heavy object rolls across the floor. Brad steps back, his heart jolting, and he feels cold sweat bead on his forehead. His fingers tremble and he grits his teeth, trying to pull himself together. The sound leaves no doubt. This isn't a mistake. Someone or something is in his house. Brad tries to calm himself, but his heart beats so loudly that he can hear it in his ears. Every step, every movement feels loud. He resolutely steps toward the room where he hears the crackling, and suddenly the sound again. As if someone is moving heavily in the hallway. This no longer feels like an accident. As he approaches the living room door, Brad stops, listening. The same sound again, something heavy rolling across the floor. He cautiously opens the door, unsure of what he might see. But the room is empty. Come. He takes a few steps forward and hears it again, the crackling as if something is moving on the first floor. Brad wipes the sweat from his forehead, the feeling of being watched never leaving him. Suddenly, again a short, sharp sound. From his sides, as if someone quietly passed by. He turns but sees no one. Fear engulfs him, and he tries to gather his strength to keep his composure. And then he remembers the surveillance cameras installed around the house. Maybe it's just some small thing, a draft, an outside noise. To calm himself, he opens the camera app on his phone. There's nothing visible on the screen. Just dark outlines of the rooms, calm, silence. And then, suddenly, in one corner of the living room, an appearance. As if from the shadow, amidst the darkness, a figure appears. Barely noticeable, it moves slowly. Brad can't believe his eyes. It's a figure that seems to have just emerged from the darkness and vanished back into it. Shaken, he rushes downstairs to the room where the figure appeared. When Brad enters the room, he jumps. What was that? All the objects in the room are in place, no anomaly. But one thing doesn't let him be at ease. On the table where he had left his phone, a mark appears, dark like tar, as if from shadows. Fear begins to overwhelm him, and he realizes that these sounds and strange occurrences have no explanation. He decides to run out of the house, but as soon as he approaches the door, they suddenly slam shut with a loud screech. He can't get out. Brad tries to open them, but the door doesn't budge. Panic seizes him. The house feels like a trap. The marks on the floor lead to the basement, a place Brad had never dared to enter before. The more he tries to leave, the more he feels that this room is the source of everything that's been happening. He finally decides to go down. The basement. Silence, only his heavy breathing echoing in the confined space. He descends the creaky stairs, feeling every muscle tense. The light barely illuminates the darkness, and when he reaches the bottom, a feeling overwhelms him that he's not alone. Shadows dance on the basement walls, and suddenly he sees it, a worn chair by the wall with something dark lying on it. It's his backpack with his camera still on it, but he doesn't remember placing them there. Suddenly, everything dark in the room begins to move, and in the darkness contours start to form. It's not a person. It's some kind of creature. Unclear, with lifeless eyes and resembling a ghost, it crawls out of the darkness as if part of the house itself. Brad rushes toward the stairs, but it's already too late. The creature locks eyes with him and, as if trying to understand why he's here, takes a few steps forward. Fear tightens his chest, but he tries to escape. His steps slip on the stairs, but the figure is getting closer. Brad leaps, and then the camera in his hand starts recording. On the screen, a real reflection of the creature appears, as if it's already inside of him. Silence. And only through it, a faint buzzing sound. Brad cannot believe what's happening. He stands on the stairs, completely paralyzed by fear. The figure that's been chasing him somehow draws closer, its face indistinct, blurry. It becomes sharper, and Brad feels his blood drain from his face, his heart beating so loudly that he can barely hear himself. Thinking that he has no chance of escaping, he charges forward, blindly fleeing. At first, he nearly falls, but gathering his strength, he crashes into the dark corridor, trying to find an exit. Suddenly, his eyes meet one of the monitors that had previously shown him the surveillance cameras. And right now the figure appears again on the screen. It had been here all along, but he just couldn't see it. The camera records it, but he doesn't understand how this creature has manifested in the real world. He checks the recording, and in that moment his heart stops. What he sees on the screen isn't just real, it's him. But in the footage, his face changes, turning into something foreign, terrifying. He watches as the creature inexorably moves closer to him, and he realizes that it's not just a figure. It is him. He is the creature, the nightmare, the terror. What he saw in the game, what he experienced on the screen, has now become part of himself. The whole game, all the terrifying moments, all those scenes, are now part of the reality that Brad faces. This is his own curse, his own fate, and there is no turning back. Suddenly, a shocking sound. The basement door slams shut. What was just open is now closed. He is trapped, just like the character in his game. He tries to convince himself that this isn't happening, but nothing changes. The creature in his reflection becomes more distinct, its eyes flashing red. His limbs won't obey him. Fear grips every nerve in his body. Despair, darkness, and then silence. Brad no longer moves. And just when it seems like it's all over, the camera on the monitor turns back on. But now the screen doesn't show Brad, it shows his recorded streams. His face, once alive, is now twisted and altered, part of this dark entity that has already consumed him. Those who watched this video archive continue to comment, not understanding what has happened. They wonder why Brad disappeared from the broadcast and why his last recording is so different from his usual style. But the camera once again captures a shadow slowly moving across the room, as the sound, the crackling that they all heard at the end of his stream, repeats once more. This is not the end. It's just the beginning. The monitor screen glowed brightly, casting a faint bluish light across the room. Jones, a well-known streamer, had been playing horror games for his subscribers for nearly 3 hours. His face glistened with tension. Another jump scare had made him flinch. The chat exploded with emojis. Okay guys, that was brutal. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed. But we're not giving up, let's keep going. Viewers loved these moments. Jones had mastered the art of perfectly adjusting his reactions to the game's tension. But tonight something felt different. He sensed it though he couldn't explain why. Outside, everything was silent. The suburban night was asleep. He glanced at the chat. Someone had typed that they saw a shadow behind him. Oh, here we go again with the pranks? Jones smirked and waved it off. He wanted to dismiss it as imagination, but a chill ran down his spine. Inciting incident. Suddenly, something clicked in the silence. Jones took off his headphones, listening intently. Maybe the sound had come from the game? He turned to the monitor, but everything was calm. Then a loud crack. Shattering glass. He spun around sharply. The window in the living room, one of the few he hadn't locked for the night, was now covered in shards. The icy night wind blew into the room, making the curtains billow. The chat exploded instantly. What was that? That wasn't from the game? Jones, there's someone in your house. His heart pounded. He reached for his phone, but at that moment, another sound came from the hallway. Soft, almost imperceptible. Like a footstep. His eyes darted to the security camera feeds displayed on his second monitor. But no movement. Guys, I think someone decided to turn this into a real horror game. He tried to joke, but his voice was strained. The chat blew up even more. Lock the door. Call the cops. Are you sure you were alone at home? Jones stood up, slowly moving toward the door. His hand rested on the cold metal handle. Jones froze, listening. The house was filled with tense silence, but he felt like he wasn't alone. Guys, if this is a prank, it's really messed up, he mumbled, gripping his phone tightly. The chat continued to go wild. Don't go out. Check the cameras. That definitely wasn't the wind. He glanced at the surveillance monitor. The outdoor camera had captured nothing, just a broken window and darkness. The indoor cameras didn't show anything unusual either. But when he looked at the hallway camera, his heart pounded even faster. The door to his storage room was ajar. He could have sworn it had been closed before the stream. Yeah guys, it looks like I've got real problems, he whispered, slowly walking toward the storage room. Suddenly, something clinked from deep within the house. Jones whipped around. Something had fallen on the kitchen floor. His throat went dry. He took a step back, still holding the camera in front of him as if it could protect him. The sounds grew louder. Barely audible footsteps. Jones froze. And then a voice. A whisper. Faint, eerie. Do you see me? Every hair on his body stood on end. The chat exploded. Who is that? Oh my God, run. Jones, look behind you. He slowly turned his head. And saw it. At the far end of the corridor, where the camera hadn't picked anything up, stood a figure. Tall, distorted like a human shadow, but something was off. Its eyes white with no pupils. Its mouth stretched into a sinister grin. It slowly tilted its head. And then it lunged forward. Jones screamed, stumbling backward, almost knocking over a chair. Everything around him shook. The stream camera fell, the screen flickering. The chat was going absolutely wild, but Jones wasn't looking anymore. He bolted toward the door, charging into the dark hallway, even though every fiber of his being screamed not to go there. Heavy footsteps behind him. It was getting closer. In his panic, he rushed to the exit, but the door was locked. Oh. He hadn't locked it. Something slammed loudly in the living room. Jones looked back. Pure darkness. And then a cold breath brushed his neck. He felt something touch his shoulder. The stream camera was still recording. The viewers saw Jones slowly turn around. And then a sudden flash. A black screen. The stream ended. The camera turned on again after a few minutes. The screen was dark, with only the sound of old fans emitting a faint noise and the distant echo of silence. The stream had been stopped, but some viewers were still leaving messages. Panic spread through the chat. People wrote, "What happened? Where's Jones? Are you okay?" After a few minutes of silence, the first detail appeared on the screen. The camera was supposed to move automatically, and now it slowly panned across the room. The air felt dense, like a terrifying foggy night. Jones reappeared on the screen, standing in the middle of the room. His eyes were missing, wide and empty like a doll's. He stared directly at the camera but seemed to see nothing around him. The chat exploded with messages. Jones? What's wrong with him? That's not him. The room was dark. Jones stood motionless and only his heavy breathing broke the silence. He didn't look like himself, more like a completely different person. The camera still moved, capturing him as he calmly walked toward the broken window, where part of his shadow remained. And here, in the corner, it appeared again, the same terrifying figure he had seen earlier, standing in the darkness. But now Jones didn't run. He walked up to it, and they merged into one shadow. The chat fell silent, and the screen turned black once again, along with the last message Jones had received before everything went quiet. "Do you see me?" From that moment the stream ended forever. A few days later Jones's house was empty. He was nowhere to be found, neither on the street nor in the apartment. The streamer no longer made contact. The police arrived on a call to check if everything was okay, but they found only an empty room with a broken window and the same old computer sitting on the desk. The keyboard was covered in dust, and the monitor only displayed a black screen. And only in an old video found in his archives was there one question that lingered, refusing to be forgotten. "Do you see me?" Who was on the other end of the screen? And what happened to Jones? That question had no answer. And perhaps it never will be solved.